Before we jump into this podcast, let's just have a first word from our sponsors, NordVPN, the fastest VPN in the world and an absolute essential travelling companion. You can use NordVPN on 10 devices with just one account, easily switching your virtual location to access apps and websites in other countries. But if you're out of the country, make sure that you've got NordVPN to be able to use your subscriptions and watch the live sport that you might miss. If you're at home, use it to see if you can save money with products that might be cheaper in another region. Go to nordvpn.com/Manchester to get 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. The link is also in the podcast description.
Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Samuel Luckhurst Show on the Manchester Evening News podcasts. I've been away for a week, so you didn't hear my dulcet or mundane tones last week. You only had Stephen Railston and Tyrone Marshall to fill in, but I did listen to their podcasts, and as always, they fill in very, very well in my absence with their midweek debate. There will be another midweek debate from those two coming up this week, even though there is going to be a midweek game for Manchester United. They'll be back in action on Wednesday. But as for last week and on Saturday, the final game, the 107th time and final time that Manchester United played at Goodison Park. This to give you an idea of what the occupational hazard it is covering Manchester United at the moment. I will get into that shortly. So I will go through and dissect the Everton game as much as possible, or as little as possible, given how it was going for about 70 minutes. I'll touch upon some other issues and the story that I've done this morning on Rasmus Hojlund, and also the follow-up piece on that as well. But there was no place to start other than Goodison Park, where it was the final time, as I said, for Manchester United playing at Everton's grand old ground. It was a real wrench, actually, to just leave the place on Saturday. I think there are certain grounds that a lot of people, whether they're going to games as a supporter or a journalist or a punter or what have you, that they have an affinity for, and Goodison Park is certainly high up on my list of those grounds away from Old Trafford. I think if I was to bracket it with other grounds, it would probably be Craven Cottage. St James's Park is a singular. It's a very singular stadium given its city centre proximity. I ended up going to the City Ground a bit too often in Nottingham Forest's first two seasons back up in the Premier League, but I was very excited to go there for the first time in that League Cup tie just over 2 years ago. So those three grounds certainly, as well as Goodison Park, are pretty special. But Goodison Park in particular, I think it's impossible for Everton to replicate what they had there at Bramley Moor Dock. But even the roar that greeted the teams when they emerged on Saturday, there are very few grounds out there that you hear anything like it. And the strange thing about it is that after that, it was very quiet for a long period during that first half, even though it was the first half that Everton well and truly dominated, being 2-0 up at the interval, thoroughly deserved as well. United didn't have a shot at goal until the 42nd minute. That came from a defensive-minded player in Manuel Ugarte. He, of course, popped up with another shot, a much more accurate shot, later on in the game to get the equaliser and to earn United a point. But going back to that occupational hazard that I mentioned earlier, I messaged my editor about an hour in and half jokingly said, "Oh, my piece is done," and it pretty much was. It was roughly drafted in anticipation of United's 13th defeat of the season. And sometimes when you're watching a game, you feel it's pretty safe to be at the point where it can be hit live, it can be published immediately on the final whistle, which covering United is very, very rare, given their penchant for late drama, whether it be this season, last season, or other seasons gone by. But I just did not see a comeback from United coming, and I think even by their standards for recoveries, it was rather improbable that they did avoid defeat on Saturday. The first goal coming after 72 minutes. One word I'd say about Bruno Fernandes on that, I remember David Beckham back in 2002 against Sunderland. And the rules back there, he had a free kick, but there was dissent from a Sunderland player. And that meant the free kick was moved 10 yards closer. And Beckham was actually disappointed about that because he felt as though it closed down the angle and he'd rather have taken the free kick or retaken the free kick from the original place. But the rule back then was that if there was dissent, I can't remember what the specific reason was, but if this foul was committed by an opposition player, whether it was a handball or a strain out of the wall, so it wasn't 10 yards. Like I said, I can't remember specifically, but then the free kick would be moved 10 yards closer. Beckham wasn't happy about this, but what did he do? He dispatched it. It was a cracking strike, and United ended up winning that game 4-1. And it reminded me, Bruno Fernandes at the weekend, of that because, of course, he has the first free kick, clear handball by Abdoulaye Doucouré, who's quite lucky that it wasn't too far from the penalty area. But if he did that inside the penalty area, of course, it would have been a penalty. And then Fernandes was closer to goal. I think there was a quiz question in the Times last week that he'd gone 47 consecutive direct attempts at goal from a free kick without scoring. This was the 49th. And what did he do? He gave Jordan Pickford the eyes. He looked to the left. He hit it to the right. It was a brilliant free kick. Completely deceived Pickford. Pickford should be disappointed. He thought it was going over the wall. It was a savable free kick, but it was such a brilliant free kick as well. And Fernandes is such a unique player in that he can be playing so badly that the opponent's got to be on their guard, because I've lost count the amount of times that he's playing wretchedly and then he does something out of nothing. And it was a bit different on Saturday because he had the free kick. It was a one shot, and a player with his technique, you would almost expect him to test the goalkeeper. But it was a superb strike, as I said. What impressed me as much, if not more, after that, when it was at 2-2, was he had a shot that Pickford tipped over. It was a very savable shot. But when Fernandes hit it, he was off balance. He fell to the turf. As soon as he saw it was a corner, he leapt up straight away. He sprinted over to take the corner. For indefatigability, for durability, for ability as well, I don't think there's a United player in that squad that matches him. There's a reason why he's been United's best player since 2013, even though he only arrived in 2020. And it rather typified his afternoon that the penalty that Everton probably should have had right at the death came from a dreadful pass by Fernandes. I don't know what he was thinking, but sometimes he plays these passes where you're thinking, what is he thinking? And that's what you get with him. He wants to take risks. I remember Stephen Ralston, my colleague, and obviously you've heard him many a time, I'm sure. He said earlier in the season he felt that Fernandes was good enough to be in a title-winning side, and I disagreed with him. And there were two very good reasons why I disagree with him. One, Manchester City had a very long, hard look at him in the summer of 2019, and they didn't sign him. Liverpool also considered signing him and decided not to sign him. Now, what do those two teams have in common? Those two clubs, they're the only two title winners since 2018, since City's first title under Pep Guardiola. That in itself is enough evidence that would suggest that Fernandes isn't good enough to be in a title-winning side. And one of the main Liverpool scouts asked them at the time, or after Fernandes had signed for United, or why didn't you go for him? And he cited Fernandes's the amount of times that Fernandes gives the ball away, and we've seen that, of course, that's part of his game, and he is the ultimate moments player. He's broken into double figures for goals this season. He's broken into double figures for assists this season as well. It's not a surprise. He is a player who can hit good numbers, even when the team is underperforming, or in the case of this season with United, just performing atrociously, but coming up with relegation form. United have had what I think is six Premier League wins all season. That's how bad that they've been this season, and yet Fernandes is still hitting this level. It's a very specific level in terms of being able to score goals, being able to get key assists, key goals as well, whether it's the penalty in the derby with United 1-0 down, whether it's putting them 1-0 up at Arsenal, whether it's starting a very improbable comeback that wasn't quite crowned with the winning goal. But if it was going to be crowned by a winning goal, he was the likeliest to get it. And it's a real dilemma when it comes to player ratings, because I think if United end up losing that game 2-0, Fernandes is probably a 3 out of 10 I should correct myself. Actually, United have won eight Premier League games this season, so as many as West Ham. But going back to Fernandes, as I said, in terms of his player rating, he would have been a 3 out of 10 or a 4 out of 10. I thought he was playing abysmally up until United got that free kick, and the first shot he tries to go over the wall. It's handball, very clear handball. Doucouré probably should have been booked. I don't think he was. And the second one, he goes around the wall. He's learnt his lesson, and that is the sign of a quality player. He has had world class moments for United. He will be remembered very, very fondly whenever he eventually leaves United. And he is someone who does deserve better, but does he deserve to be in a title-winning side? I think the evidence would suggest otherwise. United have been a moments team for so many years now, and that is really symbolised by Bruno Fernandes, who is the ultimate moments player. I think he was one of maybe two or three players who got a 7 out of 10 at the weekend. I'm pretty sure it was 3 players, I should say. And the only other starter who got a 7 was Patrick Dorgu. So remaining positive, which seems a little incongruous, but I thought Dorgu was the most consistent performer for United. He was certainly the only decent performer in the first half. He offers width. He's quick. The 2 Everton players were booked for fouling him. The fact that he completed 90 minutes as well, I'm pretty sure he completed the full game at the weekend, is another good sign for someone who's just come from Lecce in Serie A, where of course the pace is a lot more sedate. It's not going to be anywhere near as quick as the Premier League, certainly not. And it also, Dorgu's performances, not so much Tottenham. There were some people who thought he did really well. I personally didn't really see it. Maybe it was some of the work he was doing off the ball, but that game's in the distant past now. But he did very well on Saturday, and I think there is potential there. And it was not a surprise whatsoever that in that first half, which was the worst first half from a Manchester United side since 2 weeks ago against Leicester City in the FA Cup, but he was bought for that system, and he only arrived a few weeks ago. So one, he's completely aligned with what Ruben Amorim wants, and secondly, he's not been ground down like the other players or the majority of the players in that team by the pressure and the scrutiny that comes with playing for Manchester United. So he's had a reasonably confident start, even though he was substituted at half-time on his first game. He did okay in that first half against Leicester, a little similar to the Everton game. He was the only one who had anything remotely about him. He had some effort. He had the odd link up with Ahmad in that first half. It was probably harsh to take him off, and also he's been played out of position. And Amorim has learnt his lesson from that. It was folly playing Patrick Dorgu on the right against Leicester City. He's since played on the left. He looks a hell of a lot more comfortable on the left wing. He's got to stay in that left wing role, I would argue, for pretty much the remainder of the season. It does have an impact on what United can do on the right, but I don't think Dorgu is right for that, if you'd pardon the pun. At the moment, though, Diogo Dalot doesn't look right for it. And Nusa Mazraoui, he's playing a lot of positions this season, but he rarely seems to actually play on the right wing. And as we've seen from watching him for 6 months now, there aren't a lot of... He's not got a huge attacking skill set there as well. So that is a problem. But I think for the foreseeable future, it's got to be Dorgu on the left and somebody else on the right, whoever that may be. Another plus was Garnacho. There was a loud rendition of his chant when he replaced Casemiro on the hour. I thought it was very harsh for him to be the only player who dropped out of the team from the Tottenham defeat. He missed a dreadful chance against Tottenham. He's missed, looking at the Premier League statistics, 12 big chances this season. United overall as a team have missed 44 big chances in the Premier League. Garnacho accounts for 12 of them. So that is a higher percentage of missed chances on one player. No United player has missed more big chances than Garnacho, and no doubt that contributed to him being taken out of the team against Everton. He has undoubtedly regressed as well of late because he's become an impact player, an impact sub. FCSB, Leicester City, Everton, those 3 games he came on with United either drawing or losing in them. They end up winning 2 of them and drawing the other one. That again highlights his prowess as a game changer. We saw that last season perhaps most memorably in that comeback against Brentford, when I don't think United would have won that game as extraordinarily as they did had Garnacho not come on. But then he did start 38 consecutive matches last season, and he was seen as a starter in just about everyone's eyes and a regular in this Manchester United team. And until recently, he was seen as a regular in this team. Ruben Amorim has spoken very positively about him and the progress he's made since he was omitted from the matchday squad for the derby against City at the Etihad in December. But of course, he's still not scoring enough goals. I don't think Garnacho's actually scored in the Premier League since November, which is quite a startling statistic. I mean, there are a lot of startling statistics related to Manchester United, but he does lift the team. You watch Garnacho and he does get you on the edge of your seat. It was a bit difficult in the Everton in the Goodison Park press box. It certainly was not good for my back on those wooden seats. It's very cramped, but you certainly feel the excitement that Garnacho generates, and that's because he is an exciting player. He can, even though he's playing as one of the two number 10s in this system, he can operate as a winger still, and he does get chalk on his boots. He does draw fouls. I think Ashley Young might have got booked for a really crude tackle he put in on Garnacho at the weekend, and that had to be seen as a positive because that highlighted how petrified Everton were of him and how he was such a huge threat to them. And it might even have been the free kick that led to the second goal. So I thought Garnacho had a really good impact. As I said, Patrick Dorgu, by far and away of the three appearances he's had for United so far, by far and away his best, and he was a positive. There weren't many positives from the result in the end, but I think those three players absolutely accounted for them. There were, of course, a hell of a lot of negatives, and the first half, as I said earlier, it was United's worst performance in only 2 weeks, and it's a shame for us that. It's a shame for everyone who goes to watch Manchester United games regularly that we've become so accustomed to them playing so appallingly and so disappointingly that it's not a surprise. It's never a shock. I felt for colleagues. As I said, I was off last week, but I felt for colleagues after the Tottenham game because it was such a mundane defeat as well. And until the weekend, I suppose, because of the frantic finale, United had become so dull, not just in the way they were playing football, but the way they were winning games and the way they were losing games. There was nothing to really sink your teeth into. They scraped past Leicester City through a goal that would have been disallowed if the linesman did his job properly or if VAR was in play. The Tottenham defeat, I didn't quite understand Gary Neville's outrage over the way United were playing. United actually played decently in the context of the game where they had 12 players missing through injury, and okay, Tottenham had 4 defenders missing: Van de Ven, Romero, Udogie, Dragusin, but Manchester United struggled to score goals. So it's like big deal that they lost 1-0 at Tottenham. I don't think many people were expecting much from them that game. They got applauded by the supporters at full time, as they deserve to, because you couldn't fault the commitment and the effort from the team. And as I said, they played okay, but in the the big picture was that they'd still lost to Tottenham, but it wasn't a defeat that required counselling. I don't think. Had they, I mean, at the weekend, the way it was developing at Goodison Park, I was having flashbacks of Easter Sunday in 2019 or Easter Sunday 2014. I was at the 2019 game, and that remains probably in the top 5 of worst Manchester United performances I've seen in the flesh. I mean, Gary Neville was furious that day, and he had every right to be furious. It was absolutely appalling. I think I actually doled out a couple of 0 out of 10s in the player ratings that day, and they were probably being kind to them. And as I said, there was a fear that it was going to go that way on Saturday as well. I mean, the Goodison Park press box is behind the dugout, but it's a little high up, but you still see a hell of a lot of how the manager is behaving. And Ruben Amorim's body language was resigned. It was borderline defeatist. There was a lot of outstretched arms. He was on his haunches a lot. I think we've seen enough of him now to know that if he's on his haunches, he's almost conceding that he's almost exhibiting United's inferiority complex, as if to say, yeah, we're inferior at the moment. And he was on his haunches an awful lot. He complained at Harry Maguire, hoofing the ball into touch. The telling moment was when Beto went up for an aerial duel and none of the United players went up for it with him. They didn't bother engaging with him. They had 3 centre-backs on the pitch, and none of them bothered to challenge Beto. And Amorim immediately turned to his bench and complained about it. And you could tell that he was complaining specifically about that. And he said after the game, he alluded to, I think he mentioned about the freedom that United were giving Beto. Well, moments after that, that freedom that Beto had, he had even more freedom because he put the ball in the back of the net and United were 1-0 up. Sorry, Everton were 1-0 up, I should say. It's very rare United go 1-0 up in games. That's a whole different matter altogether. They've conceded first in 20 of their 40 games now this season. That's how accustomed we've become to seeing United go behind in games or concede the first goal. So watching Amorim, it was quite interesting. I mean, it's always insightful when you can see things that other people can't see. And of course, the camera is not always going to be on Ruben Amorim. That there is an argument that back in the day, Sky had player cam. I think they incepted in 1999 when they came up with their red button technology. That there is an argument that you should have manager cam on Amorim because it is fascinating watching him and his dealings with players. He turned away in disgust when Rasmus Hojlund lost the ball at one point as well. He doesn't really celebrate an awful lot. He's very, when it comes to moments where he'd be inclined to exhibit some joy, he's actually very restrained. And it's, even if you go in the Getty images and type in Ruben Amorim celebrates, there are not a lot of pictures of him doing that from his time at United. And I suppose the easy response to that is that he's not had an awful lot to celebrate. But he was extremely frustrated, understandably so, with the way that United performed at the weekend. But he did make a point afterwards of saying that, in terms of what he said to the players at halftime, I'll read out specifically what he said to us in the press conference afterwards. I see what players saw and they know, and what people see. We lost a lot of balls without any pressure. We have 3 men. Sometimes we don't respect the positioning, and anyone who watched a little bit of Everton in this field, they'll be really good on the second balls, and the 2 goals are second balls, fighting in the air. That's why you get disappointed. We didn't play in the first half, but it's a good thing in the second half they play in the same position with more energy, more quality, and that makes the difference. If you see the first plays, we lose some passes and some plays. We lose the ball and have transitions against us. When we're alone in small things, it takes confidence to play. And then the second half, we start the game in a different way, controlling the game, pushing the opponent, and the team feel a little bit more confident, maybe because they have nothing to lose, but we need to perform in a better way, especially in the first half. We didn't exist in the first half. I've said far too much what he said there, so apologies if you've started nodding off. I wouldn't blame you if you had done. But the key point is that he said in the second half, regarding the players, they play in the same position with more energy. He wanted to make the point that he did not change the formation. It was 3-4-2-1 or 3-4-3, whichever way you want to say it. They're both correct as far as I'm concerned. But he does not change formation, whether it's at the start of the game or during the game. He will die in that ditch. It will be a 3-4-3 or 3-4-2-1 shaped ditch, but Amorim is going to die in it, whatever happens during his time at Manchester United. And he wanted to at least make that point, that he and the players had initiated that recovery by playing in the same formation, that he wasn't going to change that whatsoever. But he did, of course, change personnel. There were key personnel changes. Casemiro going off for Garnacho, Cheido Obi coming on for Rasmus Hojlund to a lesser extent. Obi was more of a threat. He certainly had more about him than Hojlund, who really just looks rather resigned in a Manchester United shirt at the moment. And that's a big problem as well, of course, as we've touched upon so many times, the lack of goals in this team, that the attack has been halved, that Ahmad has got injured, that there wasn't an incoming up front in January, that they signed Joshua Zirkzee in the summer, even though he's not a number 9, that they allowed Anthony Martial to outstay his welcome, that they spent £64 million, rising to £72 million on Rasmus Hojlund just over 18 months ago, even though he was not a proven goal scorer, that they didn't go after Harry Kane. You can go on and on and on about why United struggled to score goals. And it's not a surprise that Amorim has promoted, maybe prematurely promoted, a 17-year-old striker from the academy. That said, Cheido Obi has scored 14 goals in 14 junior games for United across the under-18s and under-21s this season. So given the circumstances, even if United didn't have a lot of injuries to contend with, he probably should be on the bench at the moment because of how vital he is to the team. And it'll be interesting to see what happens this week, because I think everybody would expect, unless there are a sudden, massive players returning from injury for the Ipswich game on Wednesday, you'd expect Obi to be on the bench for that match. And then it's the FA Youth Cup quarter-final against Arsenal at the Emirates Stadium on Friday night in the quarterfinals. So that's a huge game for United, but a particularly huge game for Cheido Obi, because, of course, he used to be at Arsenal. He defected from Arsenal to United in the summer. 2 days after that, it's United Fulham in the FA Cup, which for the club is a much bigger game than, with all due respect to the FA Youth Cup, than an FA Youth Cup quarter-final on the Friday. So maybe Cheido Obi will be needed on Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday this week. It's impossible to start in all those games. He certainly won't be starting in all three of them, but I think he will be needed for the first team in their Premier League and FA Cup matches this week. And good luck to him. I mean, when he came on, there was a loud cheer. It was unclear whether that was for Cheido Obi, whether it was for Rasmus Hojlund going off, whether it was a mixture of both. Maybe it was a bit of both. And then there was the first chant of Cheido from United fans, which for some of us in the press box took us back to the days of Kiko, which was, of course, for Federico Makeda. But that FA Youth Cup game, as I said, that's on Friday at the Emirates. Stephen Railston will be travelling down for it. We discussed among us in the press box at Goodison on Saturday about that upcoming tie. And Laurie Whitwell, who sat next to me, he said it was a little bit fan-centric, but he said, I could just do with a bit of positivity. And I completely related to that, because by far and away the most pleasurable and probably enjoyable United match I've had this season, in terms of just it being an easy win, good football, a calm piece to write, was the FA Youth Cup tie against Chelsea the other week. I mean, there've been highlights from the first team, the derby with United coming from 1-0 down to win 2-1. That was, of course, very frantic right at the death. The Arsenal tie as well in the FA Cup, when United showed immense resilience and defied expectations with 10 men to get past Arsenal and into the velvet bag for the fourth round draw. But that Youth Cup game, United were excellent from start to finish. They had the aberration of conceding the first goal. Other than that, they were impeccable. 1-5-1 against the second most successful team in the Youth Cup. My piece for the morning, which helped as well, I suppose, but it didn't make too much of a difference whether it was going to be post-match or for the following morning. I had the angle in mind, doing it on Cheido Obi, having asked about him at the press conference the previous week, amid the possibility that he could soon come into the first team squad, which of course he did the following week at Tottenham. And what happens? The kid goes and scores 3 goals. So I was particularly pleased for Cheido Obi that he scored those 3 goals that night. And sometimes we joke that it writes itself with United how bad they are, but that night they were so good it also wrote itself. So Stephen will be at the Arsenal FA Youth Cup quarter-final game on Friday, so there'll be dedicated and extensive coverage of that huge game if you want to follow it on the Manchester Evening News website. Continuing with Goodison Park and also slightly moving on, I've done a story this morning on Rasmus Hojlund and Manchester United coaches losing patience with him, which isn't a great surprise. I was told that one coaching staff member was particularly scathing of Hojlund's performance during the 1-0 defeat to Tottenham earlier this month. I had a friend in the away end that day who she said that she was raging when Hojlund was turning to the supporters and imploring them to make a bit more noise. I mean, that's becoming a trait of a lot of players are doing it, not just at Manchester United, but other football clubs as well, who are, if the team are needed for goal or if they're behind in the game, they'll turn to the crowd and implore the crowd to make a bit more noise. It's they should be worrying about how they're performing. The crowd can worry about the support they're providing. But going back to Hojlund specifically, he's only got 7 goals this season, 2 in the Premier League. He's not scored since December the 12th. He's now gone 16 games without a goal. As I said earlier, that reaction to him coming off and Cheido Obi going on coming on, against Everton at the weekend. It was very difficult to tell if the cheers were reserved solely for Hojlund. I don't think they were, but that reaction was in stark contrast to his full debut last season for United against Brighton at Old Trafford, when there were really quite loud boos that when Hojlund came off and Anthony Martial came on. I mean, nobody ever wants to see Anthony Martial come on for Rasmus Hojlund, but that's what happened. And I think that the booing was amplified by the fact that it was Martial coming on. But United fans were absolutely up in arms that Hojlund was coming off in that game. In fairness to Erik ten Hag, the key context was that the game was pretty much dead and lost at that point. Brighton went 3-0 up that day, I think. And it was Hojlund's first start for United. It was just after an international fortnight. He'd made his debut a couple of weeks earlier, coming on as a sub against Arsenal, having joined the club with a stress fracture on his back, which meant that delayed his debut by a month. So he probably still wasn't in peak conditioning or at the best level of match fitness that he could have been. So Ten Hag was managing his load, but the boos were still pretty deafening. And then at the weekend, those cheers, some of them will have been reserved for the fact, there would have been a reaction to Hojlund coming off rather than Cheido Obi coming on. And that has been an issue with United over the last 18 months. Some of the reactions to players, most infamously Joshua Zirkzee when he came off against Newcastle. Anthony Martial was heckled when he was taken off a couple of times last season. So was Marcus Rashford. There were boos when Kobbie Mainoo came off against Burnley towards the end of last season as well. So there have been about half a dozen instances where there's been a pretty memorable reaction to a player coming off, whether it be sarcastic cheers or boos or a little bit of both. But with Hojlund, the fact that Cheido Obi came on and looked more of a threat than a £72 million striker, and here's a 17-year-old and also someone who was born in Denmark as well, if you want to go with an added connection to it, it's not a good look for Rasmus Hojlund. And the difficulty United have is that Ruben Amorim has already publicly said that he does not think that Joshua Zirkzee is a number 9, which I think most would agree with him on. And that's another problem, as I said earlier, regarding United's the absolute mess they've made, past and present regimes of the forward line and the striker situation. They signed someone who was not a number 9 in the summer. And so the workload on Hojlund, or certainly in terms of sharing out the goals or sharing responsibility, it's not really worked out that way. There's still a big onus on Hojlund, and Hojlund was also given the number 9 shirt at the start of the season. So you expect more from him. He got 16 goals last season, which I thought was a respectable tally, given that it was his first season at the club. But it was still a season that ended with him being dropped and being named on the bench for the FA Cup final. He scored a reasonably decent goal in pre-season against Arsenal. Then he pulled his hamstring and he was out for 6 weeks. That wouldn't have helped, but you can't use that as an excuse for his current form. That injury, as I said, that occurred in late July. That was a long time ago. Since he regained fitness and came back into the team in September, I don't think he's got injured. He is someone who's just been weighed down by the scrutiny of playing for Manchester United. He's scored one goal for Denmark since he joined Manchester United, and before then his goals record for Denmark was something like 6 goals in 6 games, albeit against some pretty easy fodder, Kazakhstan, Finland. He had that goal glut at international level, and Erik ten Hag suddenly thought, well, he's a decent alternative to Harry Kane. Never mind the fact that Rasmus Hojlund was also in the process of joining the same agency that represents Erik ten Hag as well. But ultimately, he's someone who just should not ever have been signed to be the Manchester United number 9, and they have added pressure onto him this season by giving him that number 9 shirt, which you kind of understand because it was vacant. Anthony Martial had gone. Hojlund's the number 9. Why not give him the number 9? But he's not up to it, and he probably never will be up to it. And look, whatever happens with United between now and the end of the season, they will look to sign a striker in the summer. There are a number of reasons for that, and Hojlund isn't the only one. But they have got a -7 goal difference. They struggle to score goals. Hojlund's only got 2 Premier League goals this season, which is really, really dreadful for a number 9, whatever the situation at a football club. Joshua Zirkzee has got more goals than Hojlund in the Premier League this season. And as I said, Ruben Amorim has decided to make it public that he doesn't see Zirkzee as a number 9. So it's inexcusable that Hojlund has got such a paltry amount of goals. But he goes into game. You go into games, and I think we all looked at the weekend's game and thought Hojlund up against Tarkowski and Branthwaite, he's not going to win those duels. He's not going to win that battle, and he didn't. And it's a real shame for him, because when he came on for his United debut away to Arsenal, he absolutely unnerved Gabriel and William Saliba that day. He could possibly have got a penalty on another day with that tussle with Gabriel inside the penalty area. He had a brilliant contribution with the back heel for the disallowed goal, where it looked like United had won it through Alejandro Garnacho in added time. It was a very promising debut. There were a lot of promising glimpses last season, but since the summer, it feels like there's been a shift. Maybe he's believed his own hype. Some of his Instagram activity, I can't abide by. I'm sure there are a lot of younger listeners who think it's absolutely fine. I'm sure there are other listeners who, regardless of their age, won't think it's fine. But there's a bit of the influencer about Hojlund on Instagram, which, if you're banging them in every week, you can get away with it. But if you've not scored since December the 12th, then you're not going to get away with it. And it's pretty clear that he has someone overseeing the curation of his Instagram post as well, which, again, it's not particularly authentic. And he doesn't need to do that either, because from the times where he's stopped in mix zones or he's done interviews, there's clearly a character there. There is some authenticity there. And he doesn't really need to stoop to or be reduced to getting some gimmicky staff member or whatever they're, some social media expert in inverted commas to try and amplify his brand. There's no need for it. And of course, his Instagram activity has subsided in recent months, and that's because he's not been scoring goals. But as I said, the story is up on the website and has been for a while. And going back to Ruben Amorim's body language earlier, there was an occasion on Saturday where he did just turn away in disgust at Hojlund losing the ball again against Southampton last month. Hojlund lost an aerial duel, and immediately Amorim turned to Carlos Fernandes and said, pretty much, go and get Josh Zirkzee. And Zirkzee came on. Zirkzee changed the game that evening as well. He was excellent when he came on against Southampton. A few months ago, I thought Zirkzee was an absolute lost cause that United should get rid of come hell or high water this year. They should probably still get rid of him, but he has more about him than Hojlund at the moment, and he has had more about him than Hojlund for quite some time. Maybe he wouldn't if he was playing as the number 9 as regularly as Hojlund has been. It is a thankless task, but Hojlund is a striker. He's not. I mean, Zirkzee is clearly a more. He's not a centre forward. He's probably not a playmaker either, but he clearly thrives more operating from a deeper role. Hojlund is meant to be the main centre forward. And look, it's a dreadful look for United that in this era where there are some pretty spectacular Scandinavian strikers in Erling Haaland, Alexander Isak, Victor Gyökeres to a lesser extent, they didn't sign any of those three. They signed Rasmus Hojlund, and they paid more money to sign Rasmus Hojlund than City paid, as far as the fee was concerned anyway, for Erling Haaland, and what Newcastle paid Real Sociedad for Alexander Isak. So again, that's Manchester United. It is the club where anything that can go wrong will go wrong, unfortunately. At least it didn't go as wrong as it could have done on Saturday at Goodison Park, where they did at least avoid defeat. A couple of other pointers from that game in terms of the back three at the moment, that is becoming a growing concern. Matthias Salit, as I've said before, there's a reason why Juventus sold him after 3 years and Bayern Munich sold him after 2 years. He was a defender who signed on the basis of what he did 5 years ago, rather than what had happened in the 5 years since, where he's been in decline, unfortunately, since he left Ajax in 2019. Bayern Munich wanted to sell him last year. They're thinking, who's going to take him off our hands? Oh, we know Manchester United will. And Manchester United absolutely did as well. So that's not looking good. It's not been a good signing so far. He struggles to be authoritative in the back line, and you expect a lot better from a player who has played for some of Europe's most storied clubs, never mind Manchester United. Harry Maguire's mistake for the second goal was reminiscent of his of his first season under Erik ten Hag, and the Rangnick Solskjaer season, a really poor error. He just did not see Abdoulaye Doucouré coming. He was completely blindsided by him. As far as other performers, with Casemiro, we know what we're going to get. I think Casemiro's comments to AS, I think it was last week in Spain, in Madrid, about wanting to see out his United contract. I think that's more that's him. That's his bargaining ploy. He's not going to want to give up that contract. He's not going to just say, yeah, you know what, I'll take a pay cut to go elsewhere or anything like that. But United are absolutely going to have to try to move heaven and earth to get rid of him in the summer. It's difficult to identify a club. They may have to write off the asset. They may have to pay him up for the final year of his contract to get rid of him. That would be a wrench, but financially, would it make more sense than keeping him for a final year? Who knows? That's something for the INEOS cabal and the Brains Trust to discuss. But he is struggling to keep up with the pace of Premier League matches, and he was struggling to keep up with the pace of Premier League games last season. It was unnecessary to start him at the weekend. Let's face it. I mean, United got better when Casemiro went off and Fernandes dropped back into midfield. I think Fernandes has absolutely got to play in a deeper role between now and the end of the season, regardless of when Kobbie Mainoo comes back. When Mainoo comes back in, you'd think he could be one of the two playmakers with Garnacho or with Xerxes behind the striker, who would probably have to be Hojlund just by default, or unless maybe Cheido Obi, who knows, maybe he can have. He's not had an impact akin to Marcus Rashford after his first two games in a February 9 years ago. Rashford had, of course, 4 goals against Midtjylland and Arsenal, but maybe Cheido Obi can still have a big impact for United in their running. But I think certainly Ugarte Fernandes, that's an axis that has some potential, certainly for the run-in. It's a stopgap solution, but it's got to be the one that Ruben Amorim sticks with. As I said, he didn't have to play Casemiro at the weekend. He could have played. Christian Eriksen's one of the playmakers. Eriksen's been pretty good coming off the bench as well this season. Most recently, I think, against Southampton last month, where he was one of the main reasons that United won that game, having played again so abysmally and gone 1-0 down in it as well, and been 1-0 down until the 80th minute. So Eriksen is also an option there, which I didn't think I'd be saying with us in late February, nearly in March, back in the summer. But again, sometimes you can't predict what Manchester United are going to throw up for you watching them this season. I think I'll leave it there for this week. I've chunted on for long enough. We've clocked it in at around about 40 minutes there. Thank you ever so much for listening again. Really appreciate it. Please, whatever podcast platform you're listening on, if you wouldn't mind leaving a review or liking or subscribing, whatever it is that you do on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you may get your podcasts, that would be greatly appreciated as well. We'll be back later on in the week with the midweek debate, which will be a little bit more towards the end, the back end of the week, given that United play Ipswich Town on Wednesday, and I think I'll be back next Monday. Thank you ever so much for listening. Take care.